One of my favorite aspects of Final Fantasy III is the gold sword and the way it's handled mechanically in game. It's a fantasy game, in case you somehow haven't heard of Final Fantasy as a video game player or heard me say the name of the game. So there are a lot of over-the-top elements like magic and monsters and anime-style special attacks. All the weapons and armor are designed to look cool and give HEMA practitioners free YouTube content where they tell you why those weapons would be terrible in real combat, actually. So when you open a treasure chest and find a gold sword inside, your first thought is that what you're getting is really cool, because gold is better than silver and bronze, and it means victory, and people make jewelry out of it because it's valuable, and whoa, this is going to be a huge upgrade. And then you check its stats and realize that, of all things, they decided to handle this one detail realistically. Gold is a softer metal than most, but even while it's softer, it's also twice as heavy as iron is, so it's a terrible candidate to make a sword out of. The Final Fantasy Gold Sword is the weakest sword in the entire game, but you can sell it for a lot of money, and that's ultimately what you end up doing with it most of the time. So, about the gold Dynamo roller. Thing is, you can't sell it. In Splatoon 1, the Dynamo roller was pretty strong. And that's about the most that I can say for the Dynamo roller throughout the series. Since then, there have certainly been times when it was playable, but to my knowledge, it hasn't seen play at top level. It is, of course, a very slow weapon, and it will sometimes randomly have a hole in its hitbox that makes it so a well-aimed horizontal flick just misses. That wouldn't be anywhere near as big a deal for a shooter. Spray shooters should expect to miss multiple shots in every engagement no matter how good their aim is. But a Dynamo flick takes longer than all of those shots take to fire combined, so the flick not being reliable is a way bigger problem. Now the flick has a really wide hitbox, and with the amount of time it takes to fire, a Dynamo player has all the time in the world to line their aim up. I've said before that at a certain level, you just don't expect the Dynamo player to ever miss. Either their hitbox is going to fail them, or you're going to splat them before they can get the flick out. Otherwise, they win. Unless their opponent armors through it. With squid rolling, you can kinda just do that now. So all that time the Dynamo spent getting a flick ready didn't actually splat you. And now you have the time it takes to ready a whole second swing to splat them for it. Even if they do splat you, the amount of windup it takes before they can flick again often leaves them vulnerable to an enemy player trading back for the splat they got. The Dynamo has to be more careful than most weapons not to overcommit to anything, because when it presses ZR, it's locked into an animation for longer than any other weapon in the game. And even once the player has control of their character again, it's also in the slowest movement speed class in the game outside of the Rainmaker, so it might still just not get away in time. Every swing needs to get significant value and also not expose the player too much. Probably the biggest advantage of the Dynamo is its ability to hit over the top of cover. It's one of the best weapons in the game at doing this. While a Rapid Blaster, an X-Blow, or Crab Tank shots have longer range, the Dynamo's hitbox is so big that there's just no dodging it on reaction. It will force you to move far enough away that the Dynamo misses. And that ability to make people move makes it useful for skirmishing. That is, keeping the enemy team busy doing something they'd rather not be doing. It's generally better for the Dynamo to take less aggressive positions where it's further back or behind cover, so it can use its ability to hit up over walls or ledges without being engaged on directly. It can anchor a little bit, but as soon as it runs into a harder anchor weapon, it's going to get outranged and forced out of position, so typically this is where you end up using it. This passive positioning makes it fairly slow in a macro sense, not just in terms of frame data. But there are a couple places where it's not the worst idea to run one, like Flounder Heights for its control over the enemy plat, or Humpback Pump Track for its ability to hit down over the curved mid-area. Dynamo is in the best state it's been in Splatoon 3 right now because Tacticooler is such a valued special. But that's not saying very much, especially since there are so many other Tacticooler weapons that are seeing more use. NZAP 85 is one of the most popular choices in the game right now, with Tri-Slosher Nouveau and Snipe Rider also being great options for putting that Tacticooler on a weapon playing a different role. We're also going to have new competition for that Tacticooler spot when the Heavy Edit Splatling comes out, because that has Tacticooler too. It's often just redundant to have two Tacticooler weapons on the same team, so doubling up on them isn't going to get a lot of value, and Dynamo just kind of gets outcompeted for the one Tacticooler role that's available on most teams. Yeah, the weapon itself is better for the metagame right now, but that doesn't mean that there are more reasons to use it. So now there's a new Dynamo kit. It doesn't have Tacticooler, one of the best specials in the game. It has Super Chump, one of the most undertuned specials in the game. Super Chump isn't useless or anything. Like we talked about yesterday with the Incline Tri-Stringer kit, it has a way to play around it and get value out of it. You put it in a contested area to provide paint, cover, and a distraction that lets your teammates push that area more effectively. But I've always felt like Super Chump is like 80% of a special, just not quite doing as much as other options I could be playing instead. That doesn't bode well for the Splatoon 3 Gold Dynamo, because in Splatoon 2, the Gold Dynamo had the same sub-weapon and Ink Armor, which, unlike Chump's, was one of the strongest specials in the game for most of the game's lifespan. Ink Armor, into run all of your teammates at the enemy team, was one of the most powerful strategies in the game, very similar to how a Tacticooler works. Even then, that Dynamo kit was neither commonly used, nor was it even the most popular Dynamo Roller kit. It competed with NZAP 85 and Splattershot Jr. and H3 Nozzle Nose D and 96 Gal and the Kensa Undercover Umbrella and the Tri-Slosher, and all of those weapons were generally played more often competitively than it was, depending on the patch, of course. Okay, but that kind of reasoning is just based on looking at each element of the kit in a vacuum. Does Dynamo have unique synergy with Super Chump or Splat Bomb that makes it more worthy of consideration than the sum of its parts? Well, to start with, the Splat Bomb is a really ink-hungry sub-weapon, so I don't know how often the Dynamo will be able to afford to throw it. Dynamo gets 5 horizontal flicks on a single ink tank currently, and when it throws a Sprinkler, that cuts it down to 2 before it has to recharge. Sprinkler only costs 60% of the ink tank, while a Splat Bomb costs 70%. So Gold Dynamo won't even get all of the ink out of that second flick if it throws a bomb first. What's on paper a really good lethal bomb that a lot of weapons would love to have may just be impractical to use very often at all. Super Chumps aren't bad in that the Dynamo will already likely be playing from the range at which you'd want to pop the special, and its teammates will be the aggressive weapons that want to run in with it. It probably won't be able to support them that much as they rush in, but maybe once the area is clear, the space and visual noise the Chumps create might let the Dynamo sneak in for a surprise attack on opponents trying to take space back after the special's done. Getting there won't be the easiest thing, though, because the Dynamo is going to paint really slowly for itself to get there, so it probably needs someone else on its team pushing into the Chumps before it'll be able to use them itself. If Chumps were a little bit more powerful, I could see this working pretty well, which is why I'm still hopeful for buffs to lower tier options, either the Dynamo itself or the Chumps. But as the game stands right now, Chumps are just kind of underwhelming. And you know, let's say they gave the Dynamo missiles instead. Let's ratchet up the power level a bit to imagine what that would be like. Would you even use the Dynamo over a Flingza Roller? A weapon that isn't seeing much use right now either? It's a hard sell. There's a gold joke in there somewhere, but I'll let the folks in the comments section mine it for me.